Hello and welcome to another developer diary. So this time I want to focus on the purchasable items in the game, and in particular how I've gone about sort of setting that up and balancing things, because that's a major aspect for this. So let's dive right on in. And a good starting point for this is to take a look at what the actual items are. So in our purchase screen, we've got a lot of different ones. So you can purchase additional carriages. There are then upgrades for each individual carriage. And so stuff will only be shown if you have that particular carriage present. Like at the moment, I don't have a booster carriage, so there'll be nothing listed there. And it will only list stuff if there's ones available. So there are, for each carriage, there are 3 upgrades that are specific to that carriage. The first and second upgrades generally increase performance. Usually a reasonable amount. The third and final upgrade for each carriage increases the capabilities of that carriage a significant amount, generally about double. And that's the upgrade that adds in the additional level as well. So the final upgrade for any carriage adds in the upper story for it. And alongside the carriage-specific upgrades, there are also miscellaneous ones. So there'll be things like, at the moment, armor upgrades and an emergency retrieval system for if you fall off the train, being able to actually have it pick you back up, being able to install some barriers, things like that, lightning rods. All of those are available there. Now, the way it will also actually work is the cost of, say, something like the miscellaneous ones here, things like the barriers, that cost is actually based upon the number of carriages that it can apply to. So as you have more carriages, if you haven't already bought that, it will actually increase in cost. Once you've purchased upgrades, then every new carriage you purchase will have those upgrades. So that means when you purchase an upgrade, the cost of the carriages will go up as well. So if I look at the moment, I've got about 12,000 scrap, and scrap's what we use for purchasing. At the moment, every carriage costs 20,000. If I go and tell it I want to purchase the barrier system, so purchase will be in progress. So this is something that will take a bit of time for it to actually happen. While that's going, I'm going to start us moving. You can see that things like the scrap and that have gone down. Those have been spent. So purchasing will be something that will take time. The current plan for this is that there'll be essentially kind of a drone that will come in, and there'll be some visual effects, and it will apply the upgrade. So it's something where you have to manage stuff a little bit carefully, because the upgrades have that, if you go and purchase it and leave it to maybe the last second that you need it, you'll actually have a window there where you don't have it and you're locked out of purchasing stuff. But now that that purchase is complete, if I go to the individual carriages, you can see their cost has gone up. So the upgrade cost, some of the things are per carriage, some of them there's only one of it, but this is something that sort of keeps it that the cost is always going to be the same. So a fully upgraded train of a certain length is always going to cost the same regardless of the order that you upgrade things in, and that was an important aspect for it. Now the challenge with this is balancing it, because there's a lot of different factors with this, and an important thing is making sure that it's actually possible to purchase all the upgrades. So this is where spreadsheets came in handy. So I use spreadsheets a lot for the things that I'm working on, some for just sort of task planning. So you can see I was using this a lot for planning out stuff like visual assets. But also use it a lot for laying out things like this. So laying out the purchasable items. How I worked this stuff was I had a reasonably good feel for what the relative costs of things would be. And so what I set up is the cost of everything is set in cost units. And then I have a conversion for the amount of scrap per cost unit. So that meant that I, as well as being able to adjust the individual sort of relative costs of things, there was a global scale that I could adjust. And that meant that if I found that things just in general, like across the board, were off, I could scale down everything. And that's what I did. Initially, it was 1,000 scrap per cost unit. And as I did progressive sort of balancing passes and checking things like of that then has come down to 200. And then that meant some adjustments to the individual ones here. And there might still be further adjustments that I do. But this let me lay out the specific sort of cost units, those final costs. And that's good. But one of the things needed to watch for was needed to make sure that progression was possible, that it was feasible to actually, from whatever the starting train was, to upgrade to the final sort of train, and to sort of the fully upgraded version. So what I actually did with that is I set up this train model spreadsheet. And what it does is it pulls from these carriage stats, which this was where I laid out essentially what every single level of a carriage, what the upgrades, things like of that, result in its final stats being. So this was something that I pull the data from. And when you select different carriages in their level here, it pulls out key settings like how much does it weigh? What is our current engine power? What is our current storage in kilograms? And then from that, some key things like power to weight ratio, because that was really important for knowing that the kinds of speeds we'd be able to hit. This total storage was really important. And I did actually increase, as well as lowering the cost units, I did also increase the amount of storage for both the siphon and the general storage car, because I was absolutely needing more there. But what this lets me do is with this base train, I can see this is the amount of storage, and I can see all of the upgrades that I could currently afford. And then key thing with this is then being able to see, well, okay, let's say I go and then upgrade the storage car to level 1. That I can see what my total storage goes up to. I can also see what I've got option-wise in terms of the additional ones that unlocks. I could check and see, okay, well, what if I upgrade the battery car instead? That's not going to affect the total storage, so I could still upgrade things. And an important thing was I wanted to make sure that from fairly early on, you could purchase all of the upgrades, and the key thing being that there was a path from, okay, I upgrade storage. So let's say I'd be able to afford level 1 storage. So that's a 10,000 cost. So be able to afford that. As soon as I've afforded that, I can now afford the individual cars. So I can afford things like the battery car and stuff like of that. Because the storage one, upgrading that doesn't affect the cost of the siphon upgrades, I could check that. And then if I want, I can easily go and just check and see, okay, what if I had a level 3 version of all of these? What would I have total storage-wise? What would I be able to afford? So that was really helpful. And then I could see stuff like, okay, well, let's say the very next carriage I bought was a solar collector one. Where do I sit there? So I can see, okay, here's what the power to weight ratio is. I could then chuck in a full other set of ones. And again, can see the total storage. So this was really key to being able to balance this. And this was most of the balancing I actually did was in this. So it was before the data was actually in the game. And this is something that really, really recommend. It worked out very, very well because rather than having to mess with a lot of the data in game, do a lot of lengthy testing there, I was able to just very quickly see, oh, okay, I can't afford any of these upgrades with that original cost. So what I did was I rebalanced everything. So using the cost units, using the spreadsheet worked out really, really well. I did a similar thing for scrap weights. So scrap, The different types of ones are laid out here. I've set things like min and max weight for them. I've set their names and was able to then sort of keep track of stuff here, like what the minimum and maximum was, looking at stuff like the sort of average. And that was really good in terms of that meant that could get a bit of a sense of ones where, and I was looking for stuff like, okay, the min and max relative to the average and also that standard deviation, looking for things where the values were sort of too large. So if I had something that was really, really, really out of whack with the current value. So like if the, large crate here, if its max weight was something like 100, then I would be able to see that that would, increase the standard deviation there quite a bit. So that was stuff that I used to bring these values so that they're a little bit more in line. So still variation, but it's a little bit more constrained. It's variation, but variation within a range that makes it a little bit easier for balancing. So using spreadsheets for stuff like this has been really, really handy, because then once I've got that data to a point where I'm happy with it, then it was quite straightforward for going in and things like the behaviors. I could configure their cost in the cost units. I was able to configure then same thing for the upgrades, what their individual cost was. So that's worked out really, really well for being able to balance this. And then I just have a global scale for on the actual train itself for how long it takes to purchase and what that ratio is of the scrap per cost unit. That's something where also the other thing that I've done is I have started to add in, and I think I will actually ship with this. I haven't previously shipped games where I've included a debug console, but because I do have my debug console, that's something where what I'm going to look at doing, because I did actually add in a couple of cheat commands, because with needing to be able to test this is really handy just to be able to go, okay, well, give me max energy. And then I can see the total amount that's stored, or I can go, give me scrap max, and then really quick and easy for actually testing stuff. So this is something where I am going to add in more cheat commands, and they will be something that I will actually have built in there. I think at launch, because it's something where I really need them for testing, and I think there's something that then allows people to kind of experiment and kind of do ridiculous things with it, which is part of the fun. So in terms of what's next with this, so now that it's at a level where the balance is in the ballpark, there will definitely be small tweaks that I'll be doing, but the broad strokes balancing is where I want it to be. At this stage now, the focus is really on actually sort of the smaller parts to it and the more predictable parts. So that's going to be things like getting the texturing of things happening. So getting everything nicely textured, getting a few more things in terms of sorting out the visuals for this. There'll be a little bit more detailing and a bit of visual flourish to these carriages. Getting in stuff working like the emergency retrieval system and the death when you fall off. A lot of stuff with audio. Audio is something where if I can source enough music, I will probably do something where you actually can kind of pick the style of music to be playing. That's something I would like to get up and running in there. So it's a few sort of improvements like of that. There's stuff that I want to also get in terms of seasons and weather effects and general events. So there's still some large systems to go, but the high-risk systems, the core tech, the core game loop is happening there. And now it's a case of improving and polishing on top of that. My gut feel is I'm probably looking at a late April, maybe May release. Would have liked to have it a little bit sooner, but I'm also moving at the moment, so busy packing and everything like of that. So that's something that has delayed things a little bit, as you can imagine. So shooting for that sort of April-May release, I'm reasonably confident in that, given the range of stuff that's left. It's stuff that feels fairly predictable in terms of how long it will take. So I'm really looking forward to that. The visual style, there's a few more tweaks and updates there I want to do with that. Getting some clouds, things like that happening ideally. But in general, it's coming together really nicely. The balance is finally at a point that feels good. So it's at a stage where, yeah, it's those polish, those detailing, those bits that make it really sort of enjoyable to be playing and satisfying to be spending a chunk of time in, because it's likely going to be something that will take a while to get to the point where you are able to retire, which is the sort of end goal with it. And that's something where gut feel is probably like an hour. So I want that to be an engaging hour is a key thing, which means I want there to be enough interesting variety that it's, there's a joy to continuing with it. And there's the fun of like, okay, I just want to see how long a train I can build. That's the other thing I want to sort of encourage, is people being in a position where they're like, oh no, I want to see how large a train I can make. I have tested it at up to 100 carriages, and 100 carriages, it does still work quite well. Obviously, traversing the train is a little bit more challenging at that point, but that's something where I do want to get to the stage where people can be experimenting and diving in and doing things like that, because that'll be really cool. And I'm looking forward to doing that as well, and building these just monstrously long trains, because it just looks really cool seeing them weave through the valleys and that. And I'll probably tweak the terrain generation a little bit more as well, change how that sort of snakes back and forth. Is something I likely will mess with once I'm sort of doing a bit more in terms of longer term testing with it. But overall, it's come together really nicely. Really happy with how it's looking. Thanks, folks. Hope you found the video interesting. If you got any questions, chuck in a comment below, and there'll be more updates on their way. Looking forward to getting some of the textured versions of things in and showing off that, and especially starting to show off things like weather events and that once I've got those up and running. So stay tuned. There will be more updates on the way. But until next time, bye.